The mission was over. Command had prepared death notifications, had written the letters. The reconnaissance team was presumed lost in the brutal ambush of South Zara Valley. There was no signal, no survivors. Then, just as the technician removed his headset and prepared to log off, a voice crackled over the dead radio. It was faint, distorted by static, but unmistakable. "This is Ghost 7. I have the target." The entire command center froze. Ghost 7? That name had been erased from military records 2 years ago. Elise Morrow, 36 years old, long black hair, eyes cold as sniper glass, had vanished after a botched mission. Officially, she was dead. No pension, no recognition, no contact. After the failed operation in 2022, she had disappeared into the mountains, abandoned by those she had served. Command had given up. The mission was dead. But someone had been watching. A single technician, skeptical of the faint transmission, opened a locked frequency. The weak signal grew clearer, and then coordinates. Precise, accurate, detailing the exact location of enemy forces. The technician's eyes widened. That voice, those coordinates, it could only be her. The sniper who could hit targets at impossible distances, under impossible conditions. But was it possible? Was Ghost 7 really alive? Command scrambled. A young officer gasped. If that's her, she's saving the entire squad. But how could Elise, a woman erased from all official records, still be watching over them? How could she still be protecting them after everything? This was the beginning of something no one expected. Some ghosts never truly die. South Zara Valley, a rugged, desolate region, had always been a hot spot for military operations. The terrain was unforgiving, a maze of jagged cliffs and winding valleys that offered little cover. It was the perfect location for an ambush, and the worst possible place to lose contact. The region had claimed its share of lives, but none more mysteriously than Elise Morrow's. She was the best long-range sniper in the unit, known for her precision, her calm under pressure, and her unmatched ability to eliminate targets from seemingly impossible distances. In 2022, Elise was part of an elite reconnaissance team sent into South Zara Valley to monitor enemy movement. The mission was high risk, but Elise's skills made her invaluable. She had already saved countless lives, providing cover during covert operations and taking down targets with flawless precision. But in one mission, everything went wrong. The team was ambushed, and Elise's team lost contact. Enemy forces surrounded them, and with the signal jammed, they were left vulnerable. Command assumed the worst. No sign of the team was found, and no survivors were expected. Elise's name was erased from all records. No one spoke her name. The politics of military operations turned against her. Orders were given, and her file was marked terminated. She was no longer a part of their world. Officially, Elise's disappearance sent shockwaves through the unit. Those who knew her, the soldiers who had fought alongside her, were left to wonder what had really happened that day. The truth was buried under a mountain of bureaucracy. The team's official mission report glossed over her disappearance, citing unexplained circumstances and blaming the failed operation on politics. Elise was left behind, abandoned, but in the silence of the mountains, she didn't vanish. She watched. For 2 years, Elise had monitored the abandoned frequencies, the forgotten emergency channels. She had never stopped. Despite the lack of orders, despite being left out of the official mission log, she continued to track enemy movements. The betrayal weighed heavy on her conscience, but her loyalty never wavered. Elise knew the dangers lurking in those valleys. She knew the traps set by the enemy, the strategic positions, and the weak points in their defenses. Her silence wasn't a sign of defeat. It was a sign of commitment. She wasn't supposed to exist anymore. She wasn't supposed to be there. But Elise never stopped protecting her team. She couldn't. The reconnaissance team was pinned down in the valley, trapped without any hope of escape. The chaos of the ambush had been overwhelming. Their UAV had been shot down, leaving them without eyes in the sky. Signals were jammed, communication was impossible. The enemy had outflanked them, surrounding them from 3 sides. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, there was an eerie calm on the radio frequency. Command had assumed the worst. When the clock hit 1,430 hours, the emergency protocols were activated. Search and rescue were declared impossible. The soldiers' fate was sealed, and the protocol had already been drafted. Death notifications were being prepared. The mission was declared dead. But in that moment, something extraordinary happened. A faint signal cut through the static. A voice, calm and composed, broke the silence. It wasn't supposed to be there. It was impossible, wasn't it? This is Ghost 7. I have the target. A technician, still clinging to the dying frequencies, did a double take. The signal was weak but growing clearer. Ghost 7? Impossible. That name had been erased from the records. That voice, Elise Morrow, the sniper who disappeared 2 years ago, should have been a ghost, forgotten by the very system she had once served. The control room was dead quiet. Eyes darted back and forth across screens, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Elise? How could it be? The official report had marked her as terminated. No one had heard from her since the disastrous mission in 2022. Was this some kind of mistake? A malfunction? Some twisted form of fate that had led her back? The technicians stared at the screen. Coordinates were coming through now. Precise, methodical. The location of enemy forces, their exact positioning. It couldn't be a glitch. Only someone who had been there before could know these details. Only Elise. Ghost 7. A voice called out from across the room, disbelief still in the officer's voice. She's been gone for years, but those coordinates, they match exactly. This is her. The team below had no idea someone was watching them. They were walking straight into the enemy's trap. Young soldiers, inexperienced and unaware of the dangers around them, were about to be slaughtered. They had no idea that Elise was still out there, keeping a watchful eye from the mountains above. In the command center, chaos broke out. The technicians' hands were shaking as the radio crackled once again. I see 7 friendlies pinned down, multiple hostiles advancing, requesting permission to engage. The room froze. Silence fell over the entire command center. This wasn't supposed to happen. Elise Morrow was dead. But now, here she was, alive and still doing what she did best, saving lives. Permission to engage, the officer repeated slowly, looking around, unsure of what to do. Elise had been erased, her name stricken from the official records. Yet here she was, speaking with a calm authority that had once made her the best in the unit. A younger officer, wide-eyed, looked up from his terminal. She can't be real, can she? She's dead, right? The older officer shook his head, speaking with a deep reverence. She was the best sniper we ever had. They erased her, but she's still out there. And she's saving them right now. There was a moment of stunned silence before the young commander slammed his fist on the table. She doesn't exist officially, but if that's her, she's saving the entire squad right now. The transmission continued, coming in as clear as day. Multiple hostiles, rooftop sniper. West building. I have a visual. Details match exactly. The room buzzed with disbelief. The technicians scrambled to track the coordinates, while other officers tried to process the impossible. Ghost 7, the woman who was officially dead, had just described an enemy position no one could have known unless they were on the ground, on the ridge, watching from above. Only one person in the world had that vantage point. Elise Morrow. Sir, it's coming from the mountain ridge. one technician said softly, almost as though afraid to voice the truth. That's a 1,000-meter shot in crosswind. Impossible angle. Who else could do that? The older officer, who had known Elise personally, smiled grimly. Not for her. It was true. Elise had held the record for the longest confirmed kill in the unit's history. There was no shot too far, no angle too impossible. She was their best, but she had been abandoned, erased from history, her contributions ignored. Still, there she was, pulling off the impossible from her lonely perch in the mountains. Another transmission came through, steady and focused, as if she had never been away. Target acquired. Wind speed, 12 knots. Elevation compensated. The room was silent. How had she known all of this? How had she known the precise conditions? The young officer was pale, struggling to process what was happening. She was erased. She was gone. But she's saving them, just like she always did. The technician finally spoke up again. She's been listening to everything. Every mission briefing. Every tactical update. She never left. In that moment, it was clear to everyone in the command center. Elise Morrow hadn't been forgotten. She hadn't vanished. She had simply become something else. A silent guardian, watching from the shadows, keeping them safe even after they had abandoned her. As the radio crackled once again, Elise's voice cut through the tension in the command center with surgical precision. There was no hesitation, no panic, only the calm confidence that had made her a legend in the unit. I see 7 friendlies pinned down, multiple hostiles advancing, requesting permission to engage. The officers stood in stunned silence. Everyone in the room was still trying to make sense of what was happening. Elise Morrow, Ghost 7, was back. 2 years ago, she had been abandoned, erased from military records, her name dragged through the mud after a mission gone wrong. And yet here she was, speaking in real time, guiding the operation that was supposed to be over. Her voice was steady, unwavering. "Permission to engage," she repeated, with the same level of professionalism she had always shown. But this time, it wasn't just a mission, it was personal. The team below, trapped in the valley, had no idea. They were under fire, surrounded on all sides by enemy forces. Young soldiers, many of whom had never even heard of Elise Morrow, were about to be killed in an ambush. The odds were stacked against them, but Elise had been watching, waiting. She had tracked the enemy positions for hours, mapping out their weaknesses. She could see everything from her perch on the ridge, while the soldiers below were blind. The command center was in chaos, scrambling to understand how this was possible. How could Elise have been alive this whole time? How had she known the exact positions of the enemy? The transmission continued, further clarifying her involvement in this operation. Multiple hostiles, rooftop sniper. West building. I have visual confirmation. The younger officer, who had only heard stories about Elise, turned to the older officer, eyes wide with disbelief. If that's her, she's saving the entire squad, isn't she? The older officer nodded gravely. She always did that, saved the team without ever asking for anything in return. But that was before she was erased. But now, Elise was no longer just a sniper. She was a living ghost, a protector whose loyalty to the mission had never wavered. She had continued her work, silently observing and keeping track of military operations, even when no one had given her the chance to do so. And now, she was saving the very soldiers who would never have known about her existence. Soldiers who were about to walk straight into a deadly trap. Another voice crackled through the radio, bringing the moment to a new level of intensity. Ghost 7, we need you to confirm the enemy's positions. What can you see? Elise's response was quick, precise, and full of authority. I see the enemy's movements. They're advancing from 3 directions. There's a sniper on the rooftop of the west building. The team is pinned down behind a stone wall with no cover. They're surrounded. I can take the shot. The young commander looked at the screen, then at the older officer. That's impossible. That's a 1,000-meter shot in crosswind. No one can do that. But the older officer, who had seen Elise's skill firsthand, only smiled grimly. She can. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Elise had been the best sniper in the unit. She had broken records, taking shots that no one had thought possible. But now, she was not just saving the team. She was their last hope. The young soldiers below, pinned down in the valley, had no idea that someone, somewhere, was watching over them. But they would soon find out. Elise had never stopped being part of the team. She had never stopped caring, even after they had abandoned her. And now, she was the one who would determine whether they lived or died. Her voice came through the radio once more, her words crisp and clear. Target acquired. Wind speed, 12 knots. Elevation compensated. I'm taking the shot. In the command center, everyone held their breath. The entire room was focused on the screen, watching as the satellite imagery shifted, tracking the position of the team and the enemy forces. They could see it all. Their young soldiers, pinned and desperate, and Elise on the ridge, her rifle aimed at the enemy. The technician, who had been skeptical of the signals at first, now understood. Elise had been watching for days. She had anticipated every move, every turn. The precise coordinates she had given matched the enemy's positions perfectly. Elise, the young officer whispered, his voice barely audible. She's saving them. She's really saving them. The radio crackled with static. Then, the sound of a single gunshot echoed through the speakers. It was sharp, clean, and final. Elise had taken the shot. Primary target eliminated. Elise's voice came through the radio, steady as ever. Mark team for extraction. You have 7 minutes before reinforcements arrive. The control room fell silent. It was impossible. It was unbelievable. But it had happened. Elise had saved them. She had taken the shot that no one else could. She had done the impossible. And with that, the reconnaissance team had a chance to survive. But even as the extraction began, there was something haunting about it. Something that spoke volumes about the loyalty, sacrifice, and commitment Elise had shown. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need credit. She didn't need medals. She had done it all because it was the right thing to do. As the soldiers below made their way to safety, the young commander looked at the older officer. His voice was filled with a deep, painful realization. We didn't give her the recognition she deserved. We threw her away because of one mission that went wrong. The older officer's voice was thick with emotion as he responded. We did, and she never stopped protecting us, even after we abandoned her. The silence that followed Elise's shot was deafening. In the command center, officers stood frozen, eyes glued to the screen as the satellite updated in real time. The heat signatures of the enemy forces, once clustered and closing in on the team, were now scattered, some neutralized, others retreating, all of them in disarray. But it wasn't just the enemy forces that were in chaos. The command center itself was in turmoil. They had just witnessed the impossible. Elise Morrow, the sniper they had written off as dead, had single-handedly altered the course of the mission. She had taken the shot that saved the soldiers in the valley. It was over. The enemy had been neutralized, but the realization of what had just happened began to sink in. The young commander was the first to speak, his voice shaky but full of gratitude. She saved them. She really did. Against all odds. The older officer nodded, tears welling in his eyes. He had known Elise, had seen her potential, and had watched her go from a rising star in the unit to a ghost, erased from history. He had lived with the guilt of abandoning her, knowing she had been the best sniper they had ever had. But now, standing in front of the screen, he could only feel a profound mix of awe and regret. We threw her away, but she never stopped watching. never stopped caring. We gave up on her, but she never gave up on us. Another officer broke the silence. She never asked for recognition. Not once. She did what needed to be done. His voice cracked as he spoke. And she did it alone. All these years, as the team below gathered for extraction, the realization of Elise's true sacrifice weighed heavily on everyone involved. She hadn't just saved the mission, she had given them a second chance. The soldiers who had once thought themselves abandoned were now alive, thanks to a ghost who had been watching over them all along. The radio crackled one final time, this time with a calm, almost somber tone. Target neutralized. Extraction is complete. All souls accounted for. The technician, who had witnessed everything unfold on the monitors, looked at the screen with disbelief. "She's still alive," he murmured. "She's still out there, even after everything." The soldiers below, now safely out of harm's way, would never know the full extent of Elise's involvement. They would never know how she had saved them from the shadows, without recognition or backup. They would never hear her name spoken again. But the truth was undeniable. Elise Morrow, Ghost 7, had not only saved their lives, she had reminded them of something much more important: loyalty, sacrifice, and honor. She had done what no one else could, and in the process, she had taught them all what it meant to be a true protector, fighting not for recognition, but for what was right. The young commander wiped his eyes, his voice barely above a whisper as he spoke to the officer beside him. "We owe her everything." The older officer nodded slowly. "We do, and we can never repay her. But we'll never forget her either." As the last of the soldiers filed into the extraction zone, alive and safe, they looked back toward the mountains. The ridge, once a symbol of uncertainty and fear, now felt different. The danger had passed, but something remained, an invisible presence, a silent promise. The young commander, still shaken by the events of the day, stood at the edge of the zone, watching the horizon. He couldn't shake the image of Elise standing there unseen, the lone figure who had saved them all. The team had made it out, but only because of her, only because she had refused to let them fall into the trap, even after the world had abandoned her. In the command center, officers were still reeling from the events that had unfolded. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A woman who had been discarded, erased from all records, returning to save the very people who had forsaken her. They had underestimated her strength, her loyalty, and her resilience. Elise Morrow had become more than a soldier. She had become a symbol of sacrifice, of honor, and of duty beyond recognition. The older officer pulled up her old files on the secure terminal once again. The photographs of a younger Elise, in full combat gear, stood stark against the glowing screen. Commendations, mission reports, all classified, all terminated. "Look at this," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "She saved lives, countless lives. Yet we cast her aside. We erased her." A technician, who had been following the transmissions with a heavy heart, looked up from his screen. "We didn't just lose her," he said softly. "We lost our way. And now, she's saving lives again in the shadows. Not for medals, not for praise, but because it's the right thing to do." The young commander clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the truth. Elise had done everything for them. She had given up everything for the mission, for the team, and in return, she had received nothing, except the satisfaction of knowing she had saved lives. It was then that he understood. The greatest heroes aren't the ones with medals on their chests. They aren't the ones who receive applause and accolades. They are the ones who fight in silence, who do what's right even when no one is watching. Elise Morrow had become a legend, not because of the recognition she received, but because of the integrity and honor she had lived by. As the last of the soldiers made their way back to safety, the young commander stood in the clearing, his thoughts turning to Elise. He thought about her loyalty, her sacrifice, and the silent promise she had made to always be there when needed. Some heroes never want recognition. Some heroes only show up when the world needs them most. And Ghost 7 had shown the world exactly what true heroism meant. In a world full of noise and chaos, it's the quiet ones who often make the most profound impact. The heroes who don't seek recognition, the ones who fight for what's right even when no one is watching, are the ones who truly change lives. Ghost 7 wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol of loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. Elise Morrow didn't need medals or accolades. She didn't need to be remembered by the world. She simply chose to do what was right, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, even after being abandoned by the very people she had once served. Her story is a reminder that the greatest acts of heroism don't always come with praise or applause. In the end, we all have a choice: to be the loud voice in the crowd or the silent guardian in the shadows. Who will you be? Will you choose to fight for others, even when no one sees? Let Elise's legacy inspire you. Choose honor over recognition. Choose love over bitterness. Because sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones who refuse to disappear.